All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. You ready, Colleen?
I'm all ready.
Awesome. Well, I am really excited that everyone was able to join us today. My name is Greg Howenstein. I'm the Director of Sales here at Docuphase, and I'm joined today by Colleen. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Colleen Martin, and I am our Director of Business Development over here at Docuphase.
We have been learning all things accounting and automation and increasing efficiency. Both of us, we've both been working here about 4 years together, 8 years in total, I guess, if you added all that time up. And we're excited to share with you some of the things we've learned and what we're actually going to be going through. Today, really what we're hoping you learn or gain by being here is just understanding a little bit more how to use automation as well as how to actually get something into your organization. One of the things we find a lot of times is that really understanding the goals and priorities of your team is something that most organizations don't have a good way of doing and a good way of figuring out, how determining if automation or any other tool will be meaningfully implemented and really how to justify it. And so what we're hoping is that we can help you really have a better understanding of how to do that, navigate some of the speed bumps that we've seen other organizations go through, and actually figure out if this technology that we'll go through at the end, so you can actually see the system, if it'll make a meaningful difference for your organization. Is there anything you wanted to add, Colleen?
No, you pretty much covered it, just reiterating the fact that, being in this industry for as long as we have, we found it either makes sense to automate or it doesn't. So as we go through this, we're going to share a lot of the benchmarks that we've seen, what automation looks like, and also walk through some ways that you guys can determine within your own organization whether or not it even makes sense to investigate this further.
Exactly, and I love that you brought up benchmarks there, Colleen, because that's actually one of the things we're going to start with. Most organizations, when they are exploring things like this, they are looking out to industry white papers, looking out for data out there to compare what's going on in my organization to what's going on in the average organization or in the best of breed organizations. Docuphase myself, really specifically as well, has a hard time with some of the industry data that's out there. It seems like a lot of it is been heavily influenced by other providers to paint the worst case possible picture for organizations to compare themselves against. So we actually have gone out and started benchmarking and collecting data from existing clients and prospective clients about their true current state so that you can understand truly from other people looking for the same things and looking to accomplish the same things, what their actual environment is like. So we've gone out, we've talked to all these people and all these organizations, we've completely anonymized all of their data and then refunneled it actually back into this presentation today, utilizing a benchmarking tool or an ROI calculator that we created that allowed organizations to actually find really in their current processes what the current state costs were, not what the guesses were, but truly with their resources and their teams, what it was. And really to start all that out, what we talk about with them is really what pre-automation or what their current state looks like, who's opening the mail, how things are being physically assigned or physically determined, how people are actually finding the information they need, whether they actually need to do things like three-way match or actual investigation of other information in other systems, how they know who to send something to. This is normally where people pull out that actual Excel document that's printed out or they're laminated and stuck to the desk. And then when they talk about all the follow-up they have to do and all the reminders they have to send and all of the actual nagging that ends up happening just to get their job done. Then we ask them about how they get things into the actual accounting system. It's a lot of manual data entry, a lot of band-aids on fingers, and a lot of just painfully slow work before things are actually ready to be paid and backup is created. All of this, though, when we went through this analysis with these people and tried to understand how their day-to-day worked. What we found is that there's actually a lot more going on in those teams and in those organizations when they were looking for a solution. On average, when those organizations reached out to our team, they were processing a little bit over 1,500 invoices every month, the majority of those actually being PO related. When you think about it, obviously, because that's where there's a lot more manual and individual comparisons being done. And their teams of AP were over 5 people. Now, all of that actually resulted in them actually taking on average 19 minutes per invoice to get through the process when you look at all of the different steps. The average cost per invoice for that, when you look at all of the resource and burdened labor costs of all of the support team members, was a little bit under $13. But this is a key differentiation point. Industry figures say it's almost $17. This again, for us, proved our hypothesis that there's a lot more efficiency in the processes of most organizations than the data that had been selected for a lot of these industry figures. And it was actually, interestingly, also true when we looked at after automation, that the after automation cost is only $2.30 versus $3.30 on average, that the industry figures said. So that even after automation, real world numbers were better than the industry figures. And these benchmarks, the 229 after automation, and then the 1291, not the 1670, the 1291 pre-automation, these two figures are really the two benchmarks that our engagements with clients and our repetitive investigation into this in all different industries, all different geographic locations, really every other variable accounted for, are the ones you should use when comparing your current state and your goals of where you're going to get, to see how this makes sense and whether it makes sense and whether there's room to actually have additional revenue or additional resources in the organization directed to a project. Because after automation, what happens? Well, it's, you're not doing most of those tasks anymore. In a truly automated environment, the capture should be automatic. Email and file folders should be extracted from automatically. There shouldn't be any data entry. OCR, optical character recognition, should be pulling all that off for you. Validation and match should be happening because that's just a data comparison. Coding should be automatic, or at least the best option automatic. Routing should be automatic. Really, invoice approval a lot of times will be the first time that any team member actually has to interact with any of these documents and make a decision. And then the reminders are automatic. Your accounting teams aren't having to do the nagging, the system's doing the nagging. The data entry is via API, so nobody has to do any data entry. Payments can be automated so that all of the ACHs and the actual printed and mailed checks is not something your team is doing, and everything in a document management system from cradle to grave of the process instead of just at the end. This is that vision that most organizations are shooting for, and the ones that they come to us asking about. And so, before we get into how to figure out the project, and I guess, Colleen, did you have anything that with this benchmark data that you thought that was also interesting, or that our viewers today would benefit from learning?
Yeah, I think what was really interesting to find was those industry numbers that you saw, the ones that you went over that we didn't see as realistic. I think a lot of it came back to not accounting for things that were, in our minds, of course, not automated, but may be considered automated. So those numbers were taking into account things like everything was still paper-based. So having to print off an invoice, walk it to somebody, where in reality, you guys might live in an organization where it's a little bit of mix of both. You're still having some paper-based invoices, but you're routing via email, you're routing reminders via email. And although that is more automated than the paper-based fashion, it still isn't what we call automation. But I think that that's where a lot of the discrepancy between that industry average and ours comes from, is we take into account those different variables and how your organization is actually functioning.
That's a great point. You know, as we look forward in actually what we're going through today, there's a whole workbook that is going to be available to everyone that is on the webinar today that goes through a lot of this. So don't worry about trying to take notes on every single thing or trying to follow along in the questions and examples we're going through, because there's something even more detailed than what we're going to be talking about that'll be available to everyone that goes through this presentation. And really, that it's our building a business case workbook. It's the artifact of what we're going to talk about, because you know, when you start this and start this methodology, this tool really helps you with this project or any other project you might want to go through. Understand really how to structure your thought processes and the artifacts internally on how to make sure if somebody says yes, you know yes is the right answer, you know exactly what you're going to be getting. So a lot of that starts with determining goals and priorities. Obviously, it's, you know, it's funny when you look at this, there's so many different things that are going on and so many different really ways you need to look at this and so many different vantage points you need to look from. You know, you need to look at your individual team and then your department and then the organization as a whole, you know, all of the things you want to accomplish, and then all of the things that actually are kind of the context of those. You know, what else is happening? Where are we seeing things that are going on? Where are there initiatives already in play? And you know, how many of those are actually ones that are related to the things we're trying to do that maybe we can piggyback off of? Some of the most important things to think about when you're looking at all this is really what's important. You know, what are the major projects already on the roadmap that you either need to make sure you're moving away from or moving towards an something already with momentum. Because if there's for example, a large GP upgrade coming to your actual Dynamics environment, well, that'd probably be a time that a lot of people in the organization would say, I don't want to think about something else. And if you can identify that ahead of time, well, it gives you more likelihood to actually get something into the roadmap of being approved and worked on when you think about those contexts. So the same thing with your resources, you know, not just the resources of your team, but the resources of the other teams that you're going to need to get buy-in from and get to their time applied to in order to actually get something off the ground. And, you know, challenges more than anything, it's how do you define success? That's one of the ones that I always want to make sure organizations really focus on, is making that statement of, you know, this is how we'll know that this project was successful. This is how we're going to measure success. This is what that measurement is now. This is our goal of after the project where that measurement will be. And then, you know, over the next 2 or 3 years, months, decades, kind of whatever your management horizon is, what's that value of that difference? Because those 5 questions, when you're really looking at the goals and priorities, really form the entire value justification of the project itself and of the effort that's going to be taken by your team members to make a change.
Yeah, Greg, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I'll also mention there's nothing more deflating to a company when we're working with them, when they get all the way to the end and they're ready to go, and then they realize that another department is looking for a similar platform, and so they have to go all the way through the process again. So establishing those goals and the priorities up front, not just within your own department, but within the entire organization, is super beneficial so that you guys aren't doing duplicate work and not getting to the end of something and having to go back to include others.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's the people inside of the organization can cause some of the biggest problems sometimes because if you just don't communicate enough, you don't know what's going on. And that kind of goes into the opportunity costs and really what's going on here because you don't know how much time is being spent by other teams in the same way that if you don't evaluate how much time is being spent today on some of these things, you're not sure really what the difference is going to be. If you were able to actually go through and follow a invoice or follow a document desktop to desktop with a counter and a stopwatch. It sounds ridiculous, but you should do it because there's always ways to actually go through and figure out where is it that all of the time is being spent that prevents us from working on things in other parts of the organization. If you aren't spending time, if you're having to spend so much time doing data entry, you aren't spending time doing vendor negotiation. If you're having to spend time following up with people on getting an approval done, you're not spending time implementing a virtual card program to actually eliminate the cost of payments and start earning rebates. If you're not or if you are having to follow up and constantly do literally data entry itself, your team is not able to actually spend the time and all the reporting that you're being asked to do and all the things that is causing the overtime and all the things that are causing everyone to start trying to pull their hair out at month end because everything has to get done before quarter end, before closing the year. And it's just constant work. Accounting is the only team in an organization that's completely beholden to every other team to do their job just so that you can get your job done. And this opportunity cost goes hand in hand with really understanding your current environment. That when you think about things you can't get done, it's well, what actually is happening today? In the business case book that you guys will get does a great job of really lining up so many different individual areas to go look at and analyze. But when you look at your current state, this is really the most important part to measuring what's happening and measuring what's going on. Because when you look at all the ways that it affects your team and other teams, you really have to identify more than anything, what is going on? Where are the filing cabinets? Who is walking around? Who else in the organization needs to understand where this information is or is being prevented from doing their job by what's actually happening? And, one of the things we talk about, I know I gave that example, but when you follow a document around, there are so many things that are brought to light that most of the time no one person has every vantage point of and has every idea of what's happening. There's this general idea in organizations of how things are done, but that specific experience really is what lets you know everything that's happening, every workaround that actually exists, every edge case that there's another process or another manual point of intervention that's being done to actually get the process done. Does that make sense to you, Colleen?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an important part to getting the project, setting that foundation for your project, understanding who's going to be the key players, what teams need to be involved. And a lot of times you may not consider involving IT or HR or other departments in it, but it's very helpful to have different opinions and understand the impact that you'd have everywhere.
That's definitely true. And when you start looking at impact you're going to have, the what we call yellow lights, or that's the analogy basically is that you've got projects right on track, green lights are things that are being completely stalled and potentially canceled, or red lights. Yellow lights are those leading indicators that something could be wrong or something could be coming up that's not in the best interest of the project or the stakeholders. That when you think about those and you think about what's happening and where they are, you need to look at them as things that are speed bumps. It's not things that end projects, but it's things that actually are trying to address risk, and things where giving you the idea that risk is coming up. And one of the things we look at all the time is that when you look at the context of what's going on, like, okay, we're going to put a workflow system in place. And that then means, okay, well, because we're going to put a workflow system in place, we're not going to have a paper invoice moving around. And then when you start looking at that and start talking to users, somebody might go, well, I've got this rubber stamp I used to say when we receive something. We're not going to have that, so now we're not going to be able to do any of this, and we're not going to know when things come in. And that's a yellow light. People can start getting afraid. There can be fear being brought into the process. There's a belief that you're not going to have the information you need. And really, what you need to do when you're doing things like that and start running into those situations, one is slow down and not just run right through that yellow light and get in a car accident. So you got to take a step, take a beat, and actually start talking to people and start understanding their motivations for the concern they have, as well as raise the focus of the conversation, that it's not about the rubber stamp being gone, it's about the automation that's going to be delivered to the organization. And when you in the project team know that's a concern, then you can tell the actual end users, well, yes, you're not going to need to use a rubber stamp anymore because the system can automatically put a virtual rubber stamp on the document, or the system can automatically show you in the audit trail where something comes in. And the idea of what makes it different this time is really for you to reflect on previous projects you've been a part of and previous things that you have had to deal with, and really say, okay, I know how it works in this organization. If I don't have a project started yet, but I want to get one started, want to get something across the line, what are the things that have held me up in the past, and how can I get ahead of them, and how can I prevent them, and how can I actually use that negative experience in the past to more efficiently deal with them before they come up in the future.
Yeah, and I love the analogy that they're speed bumps, because it's important to recognize that you do have to address them. And common yellow lights that we always come into contact with are things like the holidays that people don't even consider. We have a project that we want to get done by the end of the year, but they don't take into account the schedules of other people who might be traveling with the holidays. So these things aren't barricades. They will not stop the project, but it's those things that you need to bring up in advance so that you can prepare and go over the speed bumps without having to crash, like Greg said.
And as you're thinking about all that, that kind of then gets into also your project in general, managing it and planning, how really making a plan on how to get it approved. And so this image here it's in the workbook, but basically what this does is it shows you, from start to finish vertically, the things that the kind of the stages you're going to move through for each thing of, from determining we have a problem all the way to getting a final contract approved. But then across, it's a mental model of really a space for you to say each disparate part of a sentence of, what are we going to accomplish? How are we going to do it? Who will be involved? And when is the specific point we want to complete this step, so that you can actually model your entire project before there's a project, the project of approval to get a piece of technology in place, and then create your actual presentation, modeling that to get back and get it actually into your environment. So like we had said before, everything we've gone through today is going to be available. The Building a Business Case workbook, it's a free template we have available for anybody that wants to really get any kind of technology project approved. Of course, we talk a lot in context of accounting, but the tool is something that really will help you just streamline these manual steps in the front end. And quite frankly, the steps of getting a project off the ground that no one is ever trained on, and no one ever really is given any support in most organizations on how to do. It's just most organizations, it's go ask for it and then go defend why you want to do it. It's not all of this work and all of this intentional thought on how to get it done. And so, we have that. We have some other tools that you can go through that actually walk through and kind of help frame the conversation around accounting and automation in accounting. And we're going to go through now a brief kind of overview demonstration of what Docuphase's accounting automation platform is, so that you can understand everything that all of this is leading up to and how you can achieve these kinds of results. But before we do that, I guess just on this initial part, Colleen, was there anything else you wanted to kind of leave anybody that doesn't want to watch the demo with
Yeah.
for all of that?
All I'll add is that, one of another tool that you guys can use is our team. We've been through this many, many times, and while it can be overwhelming, especially as you open up the book, like, okay, where do I start? How do I get these numbers? If there's confusion, leverage our team. We've been doing this for so long that there are things that we may consider that you guys hadn't even thought of, and we love doing this for no extra cost at all. It's just us using our expertise and best practices to help you guys, because it can be a lot, and we want to give you guys all the knowledge and the best practices so that it helps you when you go to present to your own team.
That's a great point, Colleen. So, let's walk through kind of what all this actually looks like and what it is. Docuphase itself, really, no matter what implementation we're talking about, whether it's accounts payable, expense reporting, purchase requisitioning, contract management, HR onboarding, anything else, these highly transactional, document-centric processes really are all about creating a methodology to transform organizations. And all that starts with identifying, what are the documents or data that actually are coming into those organizations, and how can we unify those capture streams so that, either through character recognition to eliminate data entry, or from the process itself, get them into the central repository. The document management system that we wrap a layer of security around to make a part of the disaster recovery and business continuity plan, that then we start integrating with other applications and systems of record. There's certain situations where Docuphase is going to have information those systems need, and there's going to be situations where those systems has information Docuphase needs. We're also going to figure out how we're going to share this with the different stakeholders, whether it's internal users, different external things like operators or partners or vendors, as well as, where is it that other applications need things shared up inside of them. All of that on top of workflow, which is what's really proactively driving documents desktop to desktop throughout the organization. To do this, we've got some different cores or tools that we use that really are the same ones we use in any enterprise automation deployment. Which ones do we connect together? Advanced data captures that front end, turning pictures into data. Optical character recognition is one of the main underlying technologies of that, but it's what allows us to not have people doing data entry all the time. Document management is now the location or the warehouse of all of these different files and images that have come in and that we've now structured so that we can find them, serve them up in workflows, or integrate them with other applications. The web forms and custom portals are what allow us to represent data without documents, what lets us start processes without documents coming in. Think of it as like a request form to kick off a whole workflow from your actual request hub. And the workflow itself is what determines how things move, where they're going in the organization, what the rules of the processes are to get the actual automated jobs done so that we can integrate things together. Whether it's accounts payable automation, whether it's expense reporting, whether it's sales order processing, whether it's a new customer onboarding for a multinational organization, It all comes down to combining these 5 tool sets in different ways to deliver any implementation that a client might approach us with. So let's look in a little bit more specifically at how the life cycle of accounts payable would work. At the very beginning, we're going to grab things from email or from file folders, send them through OCR. That's then going to actually start identifying everything that's on the document. It's going to pull these pictures or the characters that are actually printed on it off and turn them into data that we're going to start using at the header or line item level. We're going to then start actually validating, does each line quantity times line unit price equal the line total? All those line totals add up to the invoice total. It's all of those little validation points that let us actually figure out so many steps that your team is working in day to day that can be completely automated. And all of that then gets fed into the workflow engine, which is where, as you can see here, you literally draw the future and type the instructions that you want your team to have. You connect visually how the process works so that you can have anybody from your executives to a business analyst literally look at how the process is supposed to function and on the fly make changes to enhance what's going on. As soon as they click save, whether it's a simple process or something more complex, it deploys the web application, which is what actually drives the work for the team. Now, in accounting, at the very beginning, we want to see, does that vendor exist? If it does, we'll continue processing. If it doesn't, we're then going to tell somebody on the accounting team, you probably need to fill out this new vendor form. Again, workflow, forms, and document management. Give us the data so that we can actually create the vendor inside of the accounting system. Then we want to actually say, okay, now that we know this vendor is set up, have we done anything with this invoice before? Can we actually check, is this a duplicate of something that's been processed or is being processed? So right at the beginning, we can cut out work. And as it's moving through the workflow, what we're doing is we're actually following this document step to step so that it can go through every single one of these validation points without having to have one of our team members go through and do it. What we're doing with this is actually following this invoice through all of these different steps, checking all these validation points so that only the steps that are supposed to happen and that a team member has to deal with are the ones that we're taking time. Otherwise, the machine is just making all these decisions so that it can go from beginning to end with as much process rigor as possible and as little human intervention as possible. So when we do get to those steps where the team needs to be involved, one of the first ones is really the accounting team's queue, where they'll go and see, hey, what needs to be reviewed and coded to actually get approved? So an expense-based invoice here at the top, we'll see all the information that had been extracted from OCR. We'll see where we can make ad hoc decisions on who to route things to if we don't want to use the approval matrix, as well as what the GL bot had used in a little bit of machine learning and artificial intelligence to automatically code this invoice. All that being done, of course, to, again, eliminate as many clicks as possible. It's the same story with a PO-based invoice. At the beginning of the process, OCR extracts the actual PO number so that we can then, inside of workflow, see not only the invoice and the invoice lines, but also the purchase order lines and the receipt lines from the accounting system, because it's all just data comparisons. There's no reason to make anyone on the accounting team log into multiple systems just to see whether something has been fully received and whether the lines match. That is all just data. Once those decisions are made, though, it all comes down then to, how do I get my approval? If we were to log into the invoice approval, like have been sent an email notification that said, you've got a task to do, we can have the users actually log directly into the full Docuphase experience to make their decision, which is just clicking a button. But clicking a button can be done a little bit simpler if they don't need to log into Docuphase. We can just send them an email notification with all of the information about that invoice, the way it's coded attached, and give them buttons right in the email to click, so that, especially for your executives, you don't need to train them on another system. They can just open their email where they live every day right on their phone, click that button and move it forward in process. As soon as somebody does approve it, though, if you think back to that whole model of the process, there's probably going to be somebody else that needs to approve it based on the amount of that invoice. And in most organizations, that would mean somebody's managing all of that. But with an AP automation solution, why don't we eliminate the management of all that back and forth as well? Why not during implementation, we actually implement a whole rules-based matrix that you can modify right in the browser that controls where everything goes, and do it in a way that's variable and flexible for you. So during implementation, we identify these first two columns. This organization had said vendor class and currency was the way that they identified how documents moved through their process or who to assign something to. So when we set this up based on vendor class and currency, the system identifies based on that data on the invoice which approval stream to send something through. And then as it's going through workflow, based on amount, the system determines who to escalate it to as it's being processed instantaneously and automatically, so that the accounting team doesn't have to get involved. Everything then, well, with delegation of authority, figuring out if somebody's out of the office, who to send it to, without having to rebuild your approval matrix, also done right in the browser, also done as simply as possible for the accounting team, so that then all this data can be rolled up inside of reports and dashboards that you can create yourself or we can create for you, and really expose best practices inside of the organization. Now, everything's gone through the whole process. We've sent it out for all its approvals. We've done all the coding. We've done our three-way match. We've actually matched everything up. We've then made it available. But now we need to do actual backup. So like in Dynamics GP, for an example, if you were to log in, then you might say, well, let's actually go to my transaction entry screen because I'm doing some research on something. I want to see the document. Now, Docuphase itself, we can just put buttons right on top of those screens that if you were to click them, then brings up just the actual document or the search results related to that transaction so that you can see that backup instantaneously without having to go log in and perform another search and live in another system. It's just surfacing it right where you are with one click so that you can make that decision and move on. Now, we've reached the end of really the invoice processing, and most organizations say, well, that's not a full to-pay process, and we agreed. That's why the extension of all of this is payment automation. So once you finish getting your approvals done, getting your transaction in the ERP, why don't we actually then help you get the dollars out the door? So you can use Docuphase then just to select which invoices you want to pay. That'll transmit all of that data to our cloud-based processing engine. That'll then start optimizing all the payments. And what that means is actually start looking at, hey, in our 500,000 vendor network, do the vendors you're using accept a payment method in network that they don't one-on-one with customers? So in the network, do they accept a credit card payment? But one-on-one, they always ask for a paper check. Well, we push as many vendors to card, then as many to ACH, and then basically everyone else lives on a printed and mailed check. But doing the optimization allows the payments that are actually delivered to the suppliers to be in the most advantageous option for you. We then actually push all the remittance documentation right back into Docuphase so that if you want to pay something, that complete life cycle of that transaction exists in one place. The vendors actually will follow up with us if there's any issues on payment so that they're not calling you. And then we'll do all of the reconciliation in real time based on everything that happens. And all of this efficiency, all of this ease of use then also results in rebates being delivered because you're now using a virtual card program that directs some of that back to your organization. For example, a organization with about 88 million in total spend on average, we'll be able to get 55% of that moved over to ACH, a really conservative 10% on card, and 25% remaining on a printed and mailed check, which means that about 8.82 million would be paid through credit card, which also means at the end of the day, you'd be receiving an annual rebate of about $88,000 delivered to you in monthly checks. Of course, that's more than going to pay for the entire solution when you have this kind of volume going through. But that's if you only think about accounting. This is one of the biggest things with our platform. One of the things we hammer home as our differentiator is that you can do everything that every other accounts payable automation platform wants an organization to do and what you buy those for. You can do all of that with our system and do all of it with our rapid implementation packages. But then you can also do expense reporting. You can also do HR onboarding. You can also do contract management or purchase requisitioning or time off requests or HR or sales order processing or anything else that's a highly transactional document-centric process in the same platform without additional licensing fees. The real model of Docuphase is it's just about the users. So if your team isn't growing, your usage can grow without your costs growing. So, everyone that is on the webinar today, I know we've gone over a lot and that we've got a lot of things that you probably have questions about. We're more than willing to discuss all of this and go through everything. And, we'll go through some questions, just after I get a glass of water. But everybody here today, you can go to docuphase.com/reconcile and say, I'm interested and I want to learn more and I want to reserve my spot and get that special offer for webinar attendees. Now, we're not going to publish what the offer is. You are not required to buy it, but you do have to go commit that you want to learn what it is. So you just go to docuphase.com/reconcile. It's just an email address and saying, I want to be contacted about this, and we'll set up a time to go over what your goals are and what the offer is for everyone that's here today. I greatly appreciate you spending some time with us. I have to go get a sip of water before we go through all the questions. But Colleen, was there anything you wanted to go over before we let everybody go today?
No, you did a great job. I'm excited to hear from you guys, to go through some of these questions and then work together to see whether or not it makes sense to automate. And as I mentioned, leverage us whenever you can. And our goal really is just to share as much knowledge as we can. So as we start going through these, Greg, you can grab some water and let's see what questions came in.